Malo lava le soifua ma le langi mama fa'atalo fa'atu ma ofalo fa'atu yate oto uma. Hi everyone, good morning and welcome to another episode of Breaking Waves all the way from Aotearoa. I hope you've all been having a great and amazing start to your week. First of all, we'd just like to thank our sponsors, Eveni and BlueNet. Without you guys, you wouldn't be able to make this episode happen. I would also like to thank all of our supporters and our viewers and our watchers for tuning in to our Breaking Waves podcast. We appreciate you guys as well. We do this for you guys, and we just want to share the wealth of networks and connections that we have in New Zealand, hoping that it can offer you some sort of help for you, your family, or your community. On today's episode, very, very special guest. She's been on the show before, but I have brought her on again. She's been doing some amazing things for the last 2 years. We've got on Dr. Jacoba, who is the founder of the Moanaroa Pacific Research Network, which recently led the release of the Moanaroa Pacific Research Guide on September the 11th. So that literally this month. Yeah. So this is the first Pacific Research Guide developed by and for AUT and the first of its kind in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And it also includes important insights on the Pacific perspectives related to AI, artificial intelligence. So this is huge, guys. You should know how huge this is. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jacoba. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you this morning?
Yeah, I'm feeling really good, and I'm excited to share the insights around this really important work. But I think importantly too, I'm really excited to just have an open talanoa with you about any other things that might pop up that are pressing for our Pacific communities. Yeah,
absolutely, and the list could go on and
on.
on.
Go on and on. That's a whole nother book to add to your bookshelf right here.
She came in judging all my books. All these books are old, by the way.
You don't want to see the Steve Jobs book down here.
She's exposing me. All right. First of all, how has your week been?
It's been a really good week, actually. I spent the beginning of the week at a writing retreat with Pacific doctoral students, master students, doing absolutely awesome work in their communities, and especially seeing the future generation of researchers in the space. I think Aotearoa has a really promising future for Pacific research. So it's really awesome to connect to the heart of the work. So that was my week. So my cup is full.
Love that. I love that. And tell us about the working group behind this.
Yes, the working
group behind this.
Isn't it beautiful?
So pretty. So beautiful.
Well, you know what? I will show off a little bit with this book. I mean, not a little bit, a lot. I'm allowed to. But the design of the book is actually graduates of AUT, Pacific students, Sisi Panikola and Kaini Utia. And I mean, you know, Te Vai patterns and also our TAV designs, all hand-painted print. So, I mean, just look at that. Look at that. You could almost wear this as a dress. I
really enjoyed the patterns. Yeah.
But our students have had a strong voice and contribution to this, and I think it speaks to the heart of the work in terms of, you know, seeing the talent of our next generation. So, you know, just want to acknowledge our beautiful designers in this work. But back to the working group, the question you asked.
Yes.
So we've got a Moanaroa governance group at AUT, which is made up of experts right across different disciplines that we're really, really proud of, from design, from, you know, education, health. And so when you all download this book,
the link will be
you
on
will
here.
See the amazing contributors to this, and to our working group who actually contributed to the majority of the writing within this, Dr. Daisha Tunumopea, Claralyn Mariner, and Waverley as well, who supported all of the literature review, the scoping, all of that exciting stuff. So that it is robust, because we need a robust document to guide our work. So yeah, so that's, I want to acknowledge all the amazing people that we also had talanoa up and down the country. Other colleagues from other universities contributed to it, right across the university. Even non-Pacific as well had a chance to read and engage with it. We have non-Pacific academics who also engage with Pacific research. So the text in itself is an inclusive document for Pacific and non-Pacific, anyone who's engaging with Pacific research.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I have had a read through it. I've read through it the last 2 days, and I love the designs. And just so that you don't have to be an academic to read this stuff. It's it's worded very well in a language that can be understood by, if you're at an appropriate age of reading and writing, but it's so good to understand, and there's so much useful things in this book which we're going to get into in this episode.
Awesome.
Yeah, but thank you for joining us. Congratulations to the entire working group that has behind this hard work. Imagine like 50 years from now, and youth picking the same book up to use in their own research. But as I had read through this, some questions had sparked my interest. I've noted that Pacific knowledge systems are described as very dynamic. So they're grounded in tradition and also adapting to life as someone who's outside of New Zealand, outside of their home country. How do you see Pacific communities today keeping these knowledge systems alive, especially in places like Aotearoa?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And I think, and I really appreciate your invitation to engage with this, even if you're not an academic or see yourself as an academic or engaging in research. Because our Indigenous knowledge systems across the Pacific are evolving and are dynamic. But I think importantly, they're in the everyday. And I think, you don't have to be sitting in a classroom to engage with these things. That's a very Western way, I guess, of thinking about it. So in the everyday, knowledge systems are about what drives our behavior. It's about understanding how we make sense of the world and the lens that we use to make sense of the world. And often that is through our Pacific values. And often that is through our sense of connection back to our ancestral lands. And it might be the way that we experience that reciprocity across generations. So there's so many different ways that we engage in Pacific knowledge systems. I think of it personally for me, it's when I sit down and I talk to my mum, and she tells me about her experiences of fofo, for example. That's a health practice, a Samoan health practice that is
even a spiritual
knowledge, and it's a spiritual practice, and it's a knowledge system. And I can access that just through conversations with my mum. And these are the everyday. So notice the things when you're gaining new knowledge or insights from your elders around you or from other channels that you access, and take note of that because you're part of that fabric. You're not separate to it. Yeah. So
absolutely.
They're in the everyday things that we do and how we make sense of the world. Yeah.
See, I'm Samoan, right?
Yeah.
Even before colonization, Samoans had their own spiritual practice and how they decided to live communally and, the gods that they worshipped.
Yep.
What is Pacific spirituality's place in modern day research?
That's a beautiful question. And I think we need to come back to how we grapple with the notion of spirituality, because often too in research, traditional research, the place of spirituality doesn't sit with secular knowledge, and so there are things about spirituality that's been tied to religion or seen as taboo, a certain different level of sacredness that's not seen as the same as a knowledge system. But when we look at sort of pre-colonial times in the Pacific and we look at our cosmogonies, which is our creation stories, from our different atua that we had, from the different social structures and hierarchy that we had, all of those practices are deeply spiritual. So spirituality doesn't necessarily have to be only associated with religion. So I think that's the first point of difference, is thinking about that. So the uniqueness of Pacific spirituality, though, from what, the ways that I try to understand it, and looking at scholars like, Abelihau Ofa, even Kabini Sanga, and looking at Upoluva Ai, who talks a lot about whanua-based consciousness, which is about our respect. I mean, spirituality is about sustainability. All of our practices have been about sustainability, not just of relationships with people, but with land and place. So those are all spiritual practices because it's about reverence, about reverence for the places we walk and the spaces we share with the human and non-human worlds, right? So that is spirituality, but it's not just, through one religious lens. So I think the beauty of that from a Pacific perspective is that we have those connections. If we look back to our ancestral stories, our traditional chants, all of them tell us of a deep spiritual connection to the whanua, to the land, the oceans, the skies, and that we are part of a greater web of relationships, and they will continue on well past our purview, well past our lifespan. So the idea that spirituality is either one way or another, I would actually argue against and say be a bit more open and think about the multiplicities of spirituality.
I love that. And I'm sure you've heard of the documents of discovery. And
yeah.
I'm bringing this back because I am Samoan.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that as an example. So in Samoan spaces amongst youth, it's kind of very sensitive to talk about spiritual practices. It can get a bit divisive. It can get a bit heated. But it's a conversation that comes up online all the time. And I think it's a valuable conversation because it relates to the care around research, right? So all these people online are, jambling on. They're like saying, no, my religion says you can't use stones, you can't use pounamu, you can't use incense, that's, idol worship. And there's other people who say another thing. So in research, how do you take care of these kinds of conversations?
And I think that's an important question because there are things that are tapu, right? And there are things that the communities that engage in research have very strong held beliefs in, and so first and foremost, when you're entering into research as a researcher, understand that it is a privilege first and foremost that you're entering into that space. So come in with humility. Don't come in with the perspective that you know everything and that you are the only expert in that space. Take time to listen. Take time to understand, and that would be my first point of entry, thinking about it from that and your positionality. Now, in terms of practices, there are things, and I mean, this is, often mentioned in anthropological research across the Pacific, right? That there are superstitious practices, and that there are things that we do just because we do it, and we might not always understand the deeper underpinning of it. The beauty of research is that we can ask those questions, but in spaces that are respectful. So, there are things I remember growing up in different Samoan practices. Many of our youth have probably seen this from parents, but, covering mirrors and, these sorts of practices.
Not brushing your hair at night.
Not brushing your hair at night. And there's many others, across the Pacific. So let's ask ourselves, where did we inherit these practices? Are they... And how did we arrive at that? Are there chants and stories that talk about that? Let's be open to examining those things. And it's not saying, yes, it's good and it's true or false, but at least with a deeper understanding of things, you have a greater respect for it. And, it's something my mum did, and I remember growing up and, I did it too, but it's realizing there are things in this world that cannot always be rationalized. And reasoned. There are things innate that you feel in your heart that might be wrong. So you avoid it. But you can't reason and explain what that is. But that's something that is your ancestral connection that might guide you through things. I believe in gifts. I do. Ancestral gifts. And in Samoan culture, one part of that, especially around ancestral wisdoms, is tō whamanino, for example. And that is that you access ancestral wisdoms through your sleep, and that might be seen as a superstition, but there's actually parts of existence that can't be rationalized or explained. And it's about having a respect for those practices. And I think we need to... consider not always making a point about being right or wrong. It's understanding that there are multiple perspectives that exist.
I love that. In my experience, I've seen, the document of discovery and how much it's impacted my own people within the church, within their religious stubbornness, and how devoted they are to their set of ideas and beliefs, which in my experience, I'm speaking only on myself, I've seen as divisive and actually setting people apart.
Yeah.
How then do we, just some advice from you, how do we contribute to taking this, like kind of lifting this blockage, this barrier that has kept us separated for so long?
Yeah, and you're talking about sort of religious separation?
Religious separation.
Ooh, that's a heavy topic. Well, you're
Because
giving
the last one I saw,
you're giving me some
where's your magic
hard
crystal
ones.
ball that we
I'm like,
talked
I don't know if I talked about religion. No, that's okay. No, I appreciate that because, Christianity, was actually part of the imperial agenda to use it as a divisive tool to colonize. And we've got many Indigenous scholars who've written about that. And not just Pacific, this is around the world, that Christianity was actually used as a tool to divide. And if we look at politics today, it's still used as a tool to divide people. So I think first and foremost, it's understanding in the historical context that was its initial purpose as well. It was part of that enlightenment that everybody else who doesn't have Christianity lives in darkness and is not able to fulfill, their eternal, saving,
to be saved.
To be saved. So, if you look at it from that historical lens, as part of the 3 C's, which I always go back to because it's really handy, capitalism, Christianity, and colonization, it worked with those tenets, right? So it worked to divide. And I think that's something that we today across the Pacific need to be critical of in our stance, is that, if we are to look, and if it's Christianity or other religions across, you need to know the limits of it as well in your perspective, and think about how does your value and your behavior, how does it uplift the collective of humanity rather than dividing the collective. Because if you look back to, the whole structure of Samoa, for example, was about collective interests across the whole nation. And it wasn't just invested in the here and now. It was created that way because it was, you hear 5-year strategic plans.
Yeah.
10-year strategic plan. Well, the Samoa system was set up in a way for 1,000 years, 100,000 years. How can we have a longer view around our belief systems that will ensure that future generations can thrive? And that can only happen if we are critical of what divides us. So part of that is coming back to being open and honest. If my perspective of religion is this to divide other people, is it actually serving me and my people well? And if it's not, then you probably need to re-examine that and be open to that. Because if you look at key tenets of religion and then you look at key tenets of your Pacific values, they may not align, and you need to be open to, do these align? Yeah. If I'm really about alofa, if I'm really about tausua, then why am I going out and harming someone else's reputation or harming, and a lot of that too is about your own self-awareness. And
I love that. I really like the fact that you've brought up going into spaces with an open mind and also being very critical of what's being placed in front. It's a balance, right?
It's
the
a
yin,
balance.
the yang. You've got to be balanced in these spaces and not going in to be right. I have the right answer, but going there to learn. I love all of that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So in Pacific research, right, why is it so important for researchers to think about their own identity and background and their positionality from the very beginning before entering any project?
I love that question. It's one of my favorite questions because it's the most difficult thing to do. Your positionality is not neutral and you weren't just born into it. Your experiences through life, your the information you consume, your relationships around you, your community around you, all of these things have an influence in the way that you walk in the world and the way that you perceive the world. And guess what? You carry that lens into the work that you do, and you carry that perspective into the communities you engage with, right? So your positionality as a Pacific researcher, I think, is absolutely critical, because when you go into research, it's about how you inquire or how you question, you know, and you're trying to make sense of something, or you're trying to understand something better, or you're trying to highlight something that is not really known, you know. But you never come into it neutral. So your positionality, you've got to be aware of the strengths of it, the limitations of it, and the possibilities of it. You know, and this does happen. Sometimes assumptions are made. Just being a Pacific researcher doesn't necessarily make you a great Pacific researcher. You know, just because, you know, I'm Samoan, doesn't mean that I'm the right person for all Samoan research. You know, because actually I understand I have limitations in my own language, and it doesn't make sense for me to come in and try and engage in full immersion context with a whole lot of ministers, because I'm also not a minister. So it's realizing that just because you might be of that specific ethnicity, or just because you are Pacific, doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, the topic might be right for you. So part of that is understanding your positionality and your limitations entering into it. And it's realizing part of that is how you exercise humility, how you come into those spaces of co-construction and, you know, co-design and learning alongside a community. The one thing I always remember Mum coming in is like, I'll give you a poko. And I laugh because there's a truth in that.
Yeah.
When you want to seek and understand something, you don't come in with the perspective that you know everything. You can never know everything that the whole community knows collectively. So be humble.
Be humble. See?
When you're researching, that positionality is also about humility.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that's so
So
beautiful.
I ask students, you know, this is the number one about positionality. Why you for the research? Why now in this research? And why this topic? And if you can nail those three things, then you're probably in a good position to initiate it.
I love that. Yeah. Self-awareness, guys.
Self-awareness.
Yep. And so I've been in a position before where I got to interview the Polynesian Panthers. And I think this aligns with some of the thoughts that people have in the film industry, you know, positionality. Are you the right person to tell the story? And through the Polynesian Panthers experience, you know, their truth, from their perspective, their truth was not reflected well. And I was able to see what they lost in that process. And there was a lot of feedback coming from, you know, people who just watch these films and they're just like, it's not that deep, you know, it's not that serious. So I'm very interested to see this reflected in how does this look like in research when people come in without any positionality awareness and then they take on these jobs. What does that risk look like?
Well, I think it risks replicating extractive research. And we're trying to move away from that in Indigenous research because we've had that done to us for so long. So we don't want to replicate that. Just coming in, gathering information data, taking it away and doing what you want with it. You know, and there is a risk that happens, and then you're right in saying what stories are lost, what voice is lost in that process. So with research, you know, research is methodological, meaning that there are processes in place, there are checks and balances in place throughout. But I think one point that's really important is the role that the researcher has around analysis. So you're gathering, you know, might be gathering the stories, the perspectives, but it's about how you analyze that work and how does it retain the integrity of the voices that you are honouring, you know? So there's a process in that, and it takes practice, you know, and it takes time to go back to your community and go, the way that it's written here or the way that it's synthesized here, does it reflect the genuine message that you wanted to share? So it's always about circling back And I think if it gets to a point where you're coming back and there is a tension there and it doesn't feel authentic, then I think you need to reevaluate as a researcher. You need to come back and go, who am I doing this for? What is my why in this? Those are your key parts you have to remember. And I think that comes across too with the film example you shared. You would come back and go, well, what was the why here? Was it just about capturing a story, or was the why really about educating an authentic story and voice for future generations? Like, you're thinking about that.
Do you think that knowledge is important for people who researchers or filmmakers might be extracting from as well?
Absolutely, because the culture of extraction is about, take. And often with that is also exploitation. So who is it benefiting? If it's about generating funding for something or commercializing something, is that fund coming back and serving the community that it actually belongs to? So it's thinking about those sort of parameters around it, and how can the community collectively benefit from the commercialization of something, or how can the community benefit from the way that data is being shared, whether it's film or production or research or a product, a whole myriad of different things. But it should be that there is a collective responsibility back, because that doesn't belong to whoever it is that is creating that. It belongs to the community for which it came. And that's the beauty of Indigenous research, is that there's a clear recognition around the sovereignty of those voices and that data. So that's also in the book as well, about data sovereignty. But that's an important point.
Absolutely. And I like the point that you made about, it's been done to us for years. They've been extracting data from us for years.
I mean, coming of age.
But now But I have real life examples of Pacific Islanders also extracting from our own people to benefit companies that were predominantly owned by Western or people who belong to different values from us, right? So the idea of epistemic, is that how you say it?
Yeah, epistemic.
Epistemic. The idea of epistemic violence challenges us to think about how some knowledge systems, especially Western ones, have been treated as universally right, and often silencing Indigenous perspectives. As a researcher, how do you navigate these power dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, as a researcher, I grapple with both. So I don't just say, oh, look, I'm only going to engage with Indigenous. All of my education has been traversing both Western and Indigenous. And I think, it's helped me to sharpen my critical tools. But I also know clearly the limits of Western, and I know I can see the opportunities with Indigenous that Western cannot provide. And part of that is the spiritual, it's the ecological, it's the deep ancestral ties and connection, and things that cannot be framed through universal parameters, right? So thinking about economies differently, thinking about politics differently, thinking about spirituality differently through an Indigenous lens. So coming back to your question about epistemic violence, I think, I've lived this. I've absolutely lived this, and I've had to decolonize myself.
Wow.
And it's bloody hard. Because all of your education teaches you one way, especially in the European system, and then you begin to undervalue your own Indigenous knowledge systems.
Absolutely.
So one true example of this is I grew up with fofo, and I'm very passionate about it because I am a taulasea myself. My mother has taught me, I remember 2 years old running around mum and watching her fofo, and that was just part of my life. So now I do fofo with mum, and that's something we do together. But I remember having conversations as a young mum, right, with other young Samoan mums, and the kind of joking, like, oh, why do you want to do fofo? Go to the real doctor, because kind of it's seen as, and
less valuable.
Less valuable.
Yeah,
but the joking like, it's like child abuse. But, being framed like, it's a bit hard, or it's a bit, and I remember at that moment, young mum at 21, I remember at that moment kind of like this jerk reaction, like, how can you joke about being child abuse? Like, when it's something that I've grown up with, and, it really jolted me back to go, why don't I value my own Indigenous knowledge here? Why do I only trust valid health practice from a doctor or a plunket nurse when I've grown up with this my whole life with my mum?
Yeah.
And it's this whole decolonizing that I've had to work through myself. And now I see in research the beauty of our ancestral practices that actually belong in research spaces that validate our own sciences, our own practices. And I'm not saying it has to be one or the other. They can be complementary with each other. We can say, yes, go to the doctor, do your thing. There's other modes and methods as well that can be complementary, that can support on a spiritual level that the Western medicine doesn't go. So there are things over the years that I've been able to observe. And part of that is that epistemic harm, is how our young people and how our Pacific populations will privilege universal or Western knowledge over our own. And so part of Pacific research is to try and dismantle that and bring in a better balance in the way that we value our own knowledge systems.
Absolutely. And, not speaking for everyone, in my own experience growing up in school, we weren't really taught to value our own Indigenous practices and Indigenous ways. Actually, in South Auckland, I went to Southern Cross, but because it's a PI predominant, they had options. At least you could go to the kura school if you wanted to, or you could engage in one Samoan class a week. But when I went to, we're more predominantly Palangi and more diverse groups, it was really like, it's not important. That stuff you don't really need to, or it's just a very small part of the school curriculum that was dedicated to it. And it really did, I wouldn't say brainwash, but something along those lines. It made me just place Western values, culture, and how they do things higher than our own. And especially, the TVs blasting Hollywood and all this stuff.
And how we perceive ourselves in terms of success, right?
Yes.
Because you don't necessarily get assessed in the classroom context on your cultural competencies. You get assessed in English language, mathematics, like those subject-specific things. And then all of a sudden, those subject-specific things take precedence over your own Indigenous knowledge systems that you access within your home or within your family and your community. So it's quite natural to see that, you're swayed more towards privileging that knowledge system than you would your own.
And you're right, it is so hard, the decolonization journey.
It's an ongoing
like a reflection in the mirror. It's like the Matrix, literally. You got to tap in and lock in. But, okay, don't take that seriously. It's not like the Matrix. But
decolonizing our notions of success, because it's very capitalistic. Notions of success can be framed, in ways of it's economic based. It's status, all of those things. But, thinking about success, what does that mean spiritually? What does it mean to be a successful ancestor? What does it mean? There's so many other ways that we can reframe success through our cultural lens. And I think we need to be open to that as well.
I love that. So sensitive or taboo topics within Pacific communities like sexual health or even gender, what does it mean to approach these topics with cultural care? And the reason why I'm so interested in this, right, is because online discourse is obviously, I don't know, I might be wrong, could correct me. That's the online world where people put their opinions. But I'm so interested in how Pacific youth and people can have better discussions online. So this is why I'm interested in it, because how do you care for those kind of topics in research? And maybe my hopeful thinking is that could be reflected onto the digital space.
Well, first of all, I think coming back to the taboo topic of sexual health, I think that's actually a really fundamental topic that needs to be open and spoken about, especially with our young people, because whether you think it's a taboo thing or not, it's going to exist. And our young people are already engaging with it online and communities and all of these things. And first of all, we need to understand, why is it so taboo in different contexts? And it could be because of religion, it could be family beliefs, intergenerational practices. So it's understanding the taboo nature of it first, and then using that as a strength and going, so how do we open these taboo spaces so that we can be more open to engage in conversations around this? I will draw to Dr. Radelaite Kamak, who is a Fijian researcher in youth sexual health. She actually created set tiko is the term, but it's a research study with Pacific youth around sexual health. And it created a forum with other young people, other young like-minded people, to speak openly with health professionals about it, but health professionals that are Pacific values driven, that can understand and navigate that with youth. So youth need to feel safe and supported first and foremost. They need to know that no harm will come to them opening up about some of these taboo topics, and then having the support to educate parents and whānau as well. So it's a whole collective approach, but that's what research does. It enables that. And then, youth are talking openly about, gender biases. They're talking openly about fluid genders. They're talking openly about sexuality as well. And so realizing that we need to be leading those safe forums for our young people, because there is so much misinformation out there. And the way that we navigate that in New Zealand is going to be different to the US. It is going to be different to all of the mainstream media that comes on social media. So set tiko, I'll plug in that.
Yes.
You can look it up.
We will.
So youth sexual health, and that's a Pacific study led by Pacific researchers who know their stuff, and are really open for youth. But that's why I think we need more Pacific, leading the research, because we know how to navigate those cultural spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pacific research, through your book, it's not just about numbers for us. It's about our relationships with people, the collective, and our spiritual well-being. So how does Pacific data sovereignty shift the way we think about ownership and use of data?
Yeah. Well, I'll ask you this question. Yeah. So if we say the notion of whaamatai, right, the whaamatai system, and we say all data that is associated with that topic belongs to one person, how would that make you feel?
Not good.
And I wonder how our audience feels about that too. It's a fundamental concept that has built the very leadership fabric and social fabric of Samoa. So, with that in mind, we need to understand data sovereignty is about the collective ownership of that concept. It doesn't belong just to one individual who's researching it. It doesn't belong to one prime minister. It doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, that concept in and of itself belongs to Samoa. So how do we look at concepts and ideas that come to fruition through research and ensure that the collective has shared ownership over it? So in a nutshell, that's just one example of some of the tensions we have to grapple with, right? Because what we don't want is, let's say, whaamatai is written about by a non-Pacific person. All of the data associated with it is housed in a data center in Silicon Valley in the US. And let's think about the implications then. Who has the right to program, create the algorithms, and then generate and possibly sell that data later on? So that's just one example of so many.
Could you just break down why creating the algorithms by someone not of us is problematic, or kind of the risk that it presents?
So we know that with, and we all engage with algorithms. As soon as you sign into Facebook, as soon as any digital platform, there are algorithms associated with it, right? So it's never neutral. You don't just engage in it as a fun thing and you're, just scrolling and liking. Everything is curated through algorithms, and they're created by engineers who have a certain way of constructing and manipulating those rhythms to get your attention. So first and foremost, it's never neutral. So those algorithms are highly relevant to AI tools because the way that AI operates is that it draws from what they call LLM, large language models, but they're all designed by engineers who have a set series of prompts and design. So I'm trying to explain it in a way that's really accessible, but when we think about that, we might ask ourselves questions: can AI think Samoan? If the engineers who are creating, the tools that it functions in are not Samoan or not aware of our local context. And, that's why AI is a helpful tool. I'm not against AI at all, but I think to use it well, you need to understand the limitations of it.
Yeah.
Those are fundamental questions. Will AI be able to think Samoan? Will AI be able to think Tongan? And that's another reason why too AI has a lot of hallucinations. They call it hallucinations when it comes up with things that are not accurate.
Okay.
And it's like, that's why you've got to constantly check. It isn't always a reliable tool, especially when it comes to a cultural stance and the real specific nuances that come with the cultural knowledge.
Yeah. And just taking into consideration our Pacific peoples and the access that we have to resources or even to these kinds of industries, if we were to level up with some of the other nations, we wouldn't be on the same level. So what can we start doing immediately?
Oh, we need more Pacific engineers, first and foremost. Any youth out there, enroll in AUT. We need you. We need them in STEM. We need Pacific leaders in science so we can reimagine these tools for us. Like what I would say is let's as a nation, let's as Pacific people invest in our futures by leading our own research projects, our own technologies that are of collective benefit. Education is key, and I would just keep saying that, is like we need to be building our own engineers in this space,
I think that's amazing. Our solution is us, really.
Our solution is us.
Yeah.
Led by us, for us. Yes, it is our solution. That's what we can do. In the meantime, I would say, when you're engaging with any AI tools, be open to doing your own research. You don't have to be a researcher to do research. Get on, when you're looking at information coming through, ask yourself, where was this information sourced?
Yeah.
Because so much on social media, so much online is misinformation. And we're seeing that impact our very democracy. We can see that impacting the US. We can see that impacting globally because people are too quick to make a decision around truth and data from what comes up on screen.
Yeah.
And so I would say everybody should be a researcher. Everybody should be looking critically at the information and the data they engage with.
What we've jumped from topic to topic, guys, but it's been an awesome conversation. I'm loving it. So I'm just going to finish it off with one question. What lessons can anyone listening to this podcast, whether they're Pacific or not, can they learn from the values and reciprocity and relationality in shaping research and maybe even policy?
I think my message would be, don't be afraid of it. I know that sometimes, thinking about research and policy can seem intimidating. It's like a whole lot of jargon and different language, but everything that comes out of it involves you because you are part of the community. And all of these things are happening around us. They guide the way that we live as a society, and you are part of that fabric. You are woven into that tivaivai that makes that beautiful pattern of diversity and of inclusion. And so I think, see yourself in it, my challenge would be to see yourself in it. Don't think that only academics do that or only researchers do that. Like, even if after this podcast you're like, you know what, I'm going to fact check something now, I'll be super proud of you.
Love that, yeah.
Go and fact check where you're getting your information from, Be critical about what comes to you on screen. And I would also say, take your shoes off, go for a walk, feel nature around you. I know it sounds very tacky, but that is part of Indigenous knowing as well. Is like, don't forget there is a whanua around you. There is the wind around you. Slow down, be attentive, and walk in this world with humility. Be open to what you can learn.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Jacoba, for coming onto our show again. Thank you for your time and your wealth of wisdom.
Your copy.
Which is all in this book, by the way.
Download.
Download your copy. We'll have the link available.
Yeah.
But we wish you well. This will not be a final episode. We're going to be coming back with more episodes sooner. When she releases more research, which I'm sure she will. But thank you so much for your alofa, for your time. And we wish you the best on your journey. Out there on your mission to get more Pacific researchers on. Amazing.
More
I love
Pacific
it.
engineers.
More Pacific engineers as well. Thank you, Dr. Jacoba.
Malo, go well.